Hi guys, how you doing? Just thought I'd do a quick video. I've not had the chance to do one in a few weeks. So we're obviously approaching like a different phase of the strength training with regards to like we're going heavier, less reps, heavier weights as a progression from what you did previously. So someone gave me some good sort of questions that they were asking, and I thought it might be easier to address them in the video. It's kind of tied in with the email, but why strength is really the foundation of different elements of training, whether it's like muscular endurance, or sort of speed endurance. Like speed and strength are quite closely linked because of the muscle fibers that are required to perform these movements. So I thought I'd try and make a wee video just to address some of the questions that were put to me, because they're good questions. So for example, and I know that other people are thinking the same, so for example, the most common one might be something like, right, well, when we're doing reps of 8 or reps of 5 or reps of 3 or whatever, why is it better to do, like I can do 8 reps at 40 kilos, but I can only do 3 or 4 reps at 50 kilograms. What one's better? Like, which one should I be doing? And the thing is, there isn't an absolute answer to that, and the reason for that is because we talked before about intensities, and obviously, like, the more intense something is, the less repetitions you can perform of it. So the most obvious example is, so there's two extreme intensities. Like an ultra marathon. So an ultra marathon, by definition, has to be low intensity to allow yourself to continue to run for 50, 60, 70 miles. It's not easy, but in terms of a muscular point of view, in terms of like force production, it would be a low intensity. It doesn't feel, obviously it feels, it's incredibly grueling and hard. So try to not get confused with like difficult and intense, because intensity's got a very specific definition, and it's to do with like force production, muscle activation, how much muscles are required to create an amount of force in a particular moment. So that would be one end of the spectrum, like extreme endurance events, and then the opposite end of the spectrum, so like 100% intensity would be a 1 rep maximum lift. So your extreme example at that end would be Eddie Hall and his 500 kilogram deadlift, right? So the intensity is and the same goes for sprinting. So again, you've got Mo Farah at one end, both equally demanding events in different ways. Mo Farah at one end and Usain Bolt at the other. So sprinting is maximal intensity. It's a maximal intensity activity. For that reason, it's physiologically impossible to do it for very long. So that's why it's only 9 seconds long. That's why Mo Farah is not very good at 800. Sorry, why Usain Bolt isn't very good at like 5Ks, because his focus and his effort is focused on like a really maximum effort, which can't be repeated too frequently. So it's all about, so when it comes to strength training and lifting weights and resistance training to try and get stronger, we have like what's called the strength curve. Okay, so if you've got your 1 rep max is like, it depends what way you want to start the curve, but let's suppose that's the top of the curve. Like 1 repetition, 1 rep max is the top of the curve, and then a 3 rep max is a weight that you can manage just to do 3 reps, no more. So that's a wee bit further down the curve. 5 rep max is a wee bit further along the curve, and then it gradually the curve. So in other words, it's called a surf the curve. So basically, what you're trying to do is surf the curve by addressing different rep ranges and different intensities within those rep ranges. So if you can do 50 kilograms for 8 repetitions, you're maybe you're here on the curve or the strength curve. You're halfway, and then if you can only do 3 reps at 60 kilos, then you're higher up the curve in terms of intensity. Okay, so the top of the curve is the intensity, and then it comes down, and then eventually, but what we know is that the curve is quite steep. It's quite a steep curve from maybe between 1 to 15, 20 reps, and that's tied in with the energy systems and the creatine phosphate system. And then as the intensity of the curve starts to level out, it's not just constant, like it goes down and then it's very gradual, and then once it gets to a level, it kind of just stays there, and it doesn't really change past a certain point. And that's when it becomes like all about aerobic endurance, like longer 10Ks, marathons, etc., all the way along. So it's got a sort of, so the strength curve is a sort of like diminishing returns. So when it comes to strength training though, as I said, like you want to work within the strength curve, where before it just becomes like indistinguishable basically, and that's usually what we know is it's usually not. These aren't absolute figures, but usually between like 1 and 15 reps. Okay, 1 to 15 reps. That's an example. It's not an exact science, but it is a pretty exact science. So, in order to maximise your progress over year after year after year, the goal, the hope is that it's called surf the curve. So it's not that one is better as such, but you can work different areas of the curve to gain benefit from each. And the way it's traditionally done, and the best way to achieve maximum results from studies that have been done for decades, this is not new information, is the whole concept of progressive overload, where you that's literally what you're doing, you're surfing the curve. So you guys are at the moment, you're surfing the curve. So you're here, you were doing the eccentrics, 8 reps, 4 or 5 sets, well 4 sets was it, and so you were working within a part of the curve, you were working in the strength curve, you were developing your strength and accumulating overload, and your body week after week very slowly will start to adapt by growing back stronger, ready to deal with the load that you've placed upon it so that it gets better and stronger, and then the next week, and then the next week, and then now you're ready to go to the next part of the curve, or we're surfing the next level of the curve essentially, which is the more intense. It's more intense even though it's less reps, even though you're not as out of breath. The reason for that is because it's more intense. So the more intense something is at a maximal effort, 1 rep max, 10-second sprint, it's not the aerobic system that's working, it's the creatine phosphate system primarily, which isn't fueled by, well, it's not fueled by oxygen. That's why you've seen those famous videos of Olympic Christie holding his breath as he does his 100-meter sprint way back in '92 Barcelona Olympics. So this is now the more intense stage, okay, and so the question is of what was better, 8 reps or 3 reps. Like, it's one, the answer is it depends, and 2, they both have benefits, they have different benefits, but from a maximal strength point of view, you can't achieve maximal strength unless you tap into and surf the higher intensity curve, or part of the curve, which is like your 3 reps, your 5 reps, and the closer you go, the more intense your muscles are having to work, and then again they slowly adapt. But because we've done this like eccentric work, it's quite cool. A lot of you guys have been like taken aback by what weight you're managing to do now that we're only doing 3 to 5 reps. And the key about it is you're not meant to be out of breath. Like it's not meant to like get you like gasping for air, because it's not really. That's not the energy system we're now working with in regards to this. It's the creatine phosphate system primarily, and that system takes longer to recover in between bouts. So it takes between 3 and 5 minutes. Ryan did a good post sort of covering this a few weeks ago. So it's 3 to 5 minutes. So in order to maintain that intensity, and in order to allow you to keep surfing the curve up there at that intensity, you have to take 3 minutes rest in between. So if you don't, supposing you did 60 kilos and then for 3 reps, it was a really big effort, and you only took a minute rest, you wouldn't be able to do it again. And if you did, very quickly, if you're trying to maintain 3 reps for every set, the only way you'd be able to keep doing 3 reps would with off a minute rest. You'd have to drop the weight. So you'd maybe be able to keep working with 3 reps or 5 reps with a minute rest, but something would have to give, and what would give would be the weight, i.e. the intensity. So try and remember that there's a difference between absolute intensity and relative intensity. Absolute intensity relates to the force you're producing in a single effort, whether it's sprinting or lifting heavy weights. Okay, so a 1 rep max and a 60 or 70 meter or 100 meter sprint, that's the absolute maximum intensity your body can perform at. And it can only, by nature, by physiology, it can only do it for 10-15 seconds. Even a 200 meter sprint, maybe actually top elite athletes, they could probably argue that that's still like absolute maximum intensity, because there's very little deceleration. But so you've got, I'm trying to get this without making it all convoluted and confusing. So in other words, in between bouts, the recovery almost defines the intensity levels. So that's absolute intensity. Relative intensity is really more about how it feels. So for example, if I said to you, right, we're going to do burpees, 20 burpees, and then we're going to do 100 squat thrusts, and then we're going to do 30 deadlifts with 40 kilos or something like that. So that would have you absolutely gasping for air. That brings in the lactic acid system, so the lactic acid is going to start, or the ions are going to start like coming, hydrogen ions are going to start going everywhere in your body. You're going to start getting a burning sensation. You might start to get a bit of dry mouth. So that will feel like absolutely brutal, and it will feel like, oh my god, that was mega intense. But because of the volume of work you're doing, but the actual absolute intensity is lower, because the whole point is it has to be lower to allow you to do that. If that makes sense. Okay, so absolute intensity is to do with the amount of weight. So that's why when it comes to doing a sort of higher volume workout like the one I just mentioned as an example, like supposing it was like, right, we're going to do 30 squats or 40 squats. If your absolute strength, okay, is massive, let's suppose you can squat 200 kilos with a bar on your back, doing 30 bodyweight squats up and down is going to be like so easy, because compared to your maximum strength, like just doing it without any weight, just your body weight, is nothing. However, if your maximum strength, then you can only squat like 20 kilos with a bar on your back. Like the difference between squatting with 20 kilo bar on your back and not squatting with a bar on your back, there's not a huge difference. So like the difference in intensity, or the difference in like your maximum strength, is really quite close to that bodyweight version. So you're going to find that really, really tough. Okay, so I hope that kind of makes a little bit of sense, because it is a confusing concept. This is sports science basically. It can be a wee bit hard to understand initially if you're not really like gone through the whole concept of like a progressive overload program, the whole idea of periodization, and that is ultimately what we're doing. That's what defines the program. Most exercise programs don't go through a progressive overload periodization program. It's more just about going and doing a good sweaty workout, but which is great. That's not a slight on that. It's just a difference. Okay, so I know everyone loves those sort of workouts. I do as well. Like kettlebells, big volume kettlebells, getting up your sweat on, and there's definitely a good time and place for that. That's your sort of conditioning type of workouts. So conditioning is kind of a term. It's a bit of a broad term. Again, it's not a one size fits all term. Like, but generally speaking, I think people associate the word conditioning with like getting your heart rate up, getting a sweat on, burning more calories, getting moving, which is all good stuff. Whereas like it could also be considered like the conditioning of your muscles, like in terms of like what strength we want to strengthen the hamstrings to make them less prone to injury when sprinting, which is what Nordic curls would be for. And equally, we want to strengthen the hamstrings because if they're stronger, they'll be able to produce more force. And if they're able to produce more force, then in theory, if we can find a way of transferring that extra strength onto the track, since the hamstrings are the prime muscles in sprinting and the glutes and the quads to a lesser extent, then we should be able to become faster at that sport, or at running as well. So conditioning has a broad term in that respect. I think it could be to do with improving the muscle conditioning, or it could just be like that feeling of I want to feel like I'm dead out of breath. So it's difficult when you try to blend the world of like performance and the world of fitness, because they're almost like two different worlds. My mate is the head of like Northern Ireland Athletics. He will be responsible for like I think the team selection for the Commonwealth Games and all that, and it's quite removed from like, he's one of my best mates, and his what he does is quite removed from what most people's perceived ideas of like an intense exercise session would be. Like there's not a huge amount of volume in it, because if there is, then the intensity drops, and if the intensity drops, then it's not necessarily serving the best interests of the athlete who's trying to like jump higher, because again, jumping's a maximal intensity activity, so doing 100 jumps would exhaust them. But in order to do those 100 jumps, they wouldn't be jumping very high, so the intensity would be low. So they'd have great conditioning or fitness in their quads and muscular endurance, but unfortunately, like there isn't a muscular endurance event for jumping for 100 reps. You know what I mean? So it kind of depends on. So that's why it can be quite challenging to one, understand, two, for me to convey it, and because sometimes it can be so convoluted in my own head, you end up going down a rabbit hole with it, and I'm like, but ultimately it's the answer is it depends. One's not better than the other, and I don't know how else to answer that question in regards to like reps. Like if what I would say is that if you can't get any further with it, like after maybe a few weeks of a certain weight, you might be better off dropping the reps again, upping the weight, and just doing single doubles at a weight, so that your body starts to become used to it. And then over time, if it adapts to it, it then means you might be able to then, in theory, you should then be able to perform more reps at the lighter weight, which is kind of what I touched on a few minutes ago. Okay, so hopefully that makes a bit of sense. The other one question that I've remembered that they've asked was, which again is legitimate, is how deep do you need to squat? And because obviously as you go heavier, you're getting a wee bit more nervous about not getting back up, which is why a sport is good, but tends to be, it's harder, you're more likely to like stop short of the normal depth of that you did previously. So the answer again, unfortunately, is it depends. Everyone's different. If you'd asked me this 10 years ago, I'd be like, yeah, everyone has to squat ass to grass, no questions asked. But it's not as simple as that. More recent studies have shown as well that it's got benefits, of course it does, but there's still massive benefits from like reduced ranges. Again, I mentioned my mate who's the head of running and athletics when it comes to training. That's a lot of the athletes. He's not the head of the whole running and athletics. I mean, he's the head of like the team for training and stuff. Like high jumpers, again, they would do like exercises in very specific planes of movement or ranges of motion to mimic the sport. So for example, sprinters and jumpers, like you don't squat all the way to the bottom to jump up. So they would maybe do like partial range squats. Okay, so whoa, I'm in James' room here, don't want to mess it up. So like, because when you jump, you only might come to, or sprint, you might only come to in this sort of range. So they would maybe work on some very specific exercises within that range. Now, to the average person in the gym who isn't familiar with athletics or sprinting and performance, they would say, why are those guys doing such crappy range squats or crappy range like one-legged movements? But it's because they're trying to strengthen the muscles in a very specific angle related to their sport. These same guys, however, and what deep squats is a sort of indicative of is decent range of motion through the ankles, through the knees, through the hips, through the thoracic spine. So you bet your bottom dollar that all these guys, although they might always not do deep squats, they could if they wanted to, because it's a question of mobility. So if you can try and maintain a decent level, usually if you can get your femur, your quad, if you can get that area to a parallel or slightly below, then you're doing great. Okay, so, or if you can get a wee bit of like, if your calf starts to touch this part here, the bottom of the leg here, then your range is good. Okay, and I wouldn't overly stress about going all the way ass to grass. If you want, great. Okay, I just, that's how I squat. That's how some other people squat, and I understand it's all about the person if they feel that. But there's a difference between like squatting for a certain range, and then just putting more and more weight in the bar, either in a session or over the weeks, and gradually like the range just gets less and less. So you're sort of tricking yourself into thinking you're getting stronger when maybe you're just reducing the range. So as long as there's a consistency there, and over time as well, you can be working towards a deeper range. Parallel or slightly below is great, okay? But deep squats obviously can help identify, or lack of deep squats can help identify potential wee mobility issues in the ankle and stuff. So I'm aware that I'm kind of just talking here. I was talking quite fast. It's because I'm aware it's like 3 o'clock. I need to go and get the boys from school, and yeah, so I'm going to just leave it there. If this raises more questions than answers, please ask, and I'll try and elaborate a bit more. Cheers, guys.